few moments ago. Have a look at these pictures. Excuse me. Goodness me, hopefully she's not got my cold. She's about 300 or 400 metres up the road on her way, short journey by car, to the House of Commons, Palace of Westminster behind me, likely to take to the dispatch box in about 15 minutes' time. The deal is looking no more likely to be passed by Parliament, so MPs now considering different strategies, including test votes in Parliament on other Brexit options, as well as a second referendum. Mrs May has continued to rule out both of these options, remaining steadfast in her belief that Parliament must deliver on the results of the first referendum. All this, as Sky sources reveal, the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn will tell the Prime Minister he will table a no-confidence motion in Theresa May if she does not announce a date for the meaningful vote this afternoon. Joining us now are, now, Amanda, pronounce your name for me. There we go. Co-founder of the youth wing of the People's Vote campaign, Darren Grimes, who is a pro-Brexit activist and 18-year-old gap year student, Chloe Dobbs. Hello to you all. Hello. Thank you for joining us. You're closest to me, so make your case.
So we just firmly believe, as do the majority of young people across the entire of the United Kingdom, that there's not only absolute chaos in Parliament, but an impasse. And that's why Cabinet Ministers and people across the House are starting to discuss potentially this should go back to the people in a public vote so that we can actually resolve this and people can know what they're actually coming up later in their lives. We, as a youth group, firmly believe that young people are best served, their futures are best served inside the European Union, and that's why we've been campaigning with people literally from Falmouth to Fife and in all four nations for a people's vote on the Brexit deal.
I think I can understand both sides of the debate on second referendum or no second referendum, because both use the same argument. Both of them want the people's voices to be heard. But I think that I'd favour no second referendum because, firstly, there's a slippery slope of governments just redoing referendums until they get the vote which they believe is the correct answer. And secondly, it really weakens our negotiating position because Theresa May used to say no deal is better than a bad deal. But now we're in a situation where it's second referendum and remain in the EU or bad deal, which means that the EU can just force us into a bad deal to try and force us to stay into the EU. Whereas if we were to say that no, we'll take a no deal if you give us a bad deal, then the EU will have to start making compromises and caring about what we think as well.
She's stolen your thunder there, hasn't she?
Almost, but you know what, Kate? I hear time and time again that the Vote Leave campaign was nasty and it was divisive. But I think actually if the people in that gilded chamber in there turn round to people and say, you got it wrong, vote again, people will quite rightly be as angry as I am right now that we're even having this discussion. Millions of people voted for the very first time in Britain's biggest democratic exercise. If we turn around to them and say, you're stupid, you got it wrong, we want you to vote again until we get the right result, they will quite rightly turn around and punch our parliamentarians in the nose and say to them, do you know what, I'm not putting up with this a moment longer, and we will unleash forces in this country that have not been seen since the 30s. Like they are playing with fire.
Like what?
Populism on the left and the right. It will be completely awful. These people do not know what they're dealing with. I just can't understand why Brussels, being tied to Brussels, is more important than the principles of democracy. We are the home of the Westminster Parliament. We've exported that around the world. We are the home of John Locke. We have exported democracy around the world. To turn around to people, 17.4 million of them, and say, actually, no, you got it wrong, I think would be incredibly damaging.
Mother of all parliaments, we're not being democratic.
I think it's very important to note we're not saying that people got it wrong. I'm from North Cornwall. People had very legitimate grievances with their lives. What we're saying is what was promised in 2016 is a million miles away from what's being discussed by members of Parliament now. And realistically, there's quite a large promise gap between, for example, Theresa May's deal and what people said would actually happen. So I think it's actually even more important that we enfranchise people and give them back a say, in particular the nearly 2 million young people who have never had a say on Brexit and are going to have to live with it for the longest.
I think that saying that when what they said in the referendum campaign was not necessarily accurate isn't really a great argument, because every single time we have an election we're simply speculating about what the government's going to do. There are so many different factors in the mix which change what the government does and what they say they're going to do, but that doesn't mean that we redo the election every single week.
Well, no, but the difference is you have elections quite regularly. Theresa May is obviously quite a big fan of them. And I think we need to be really careful that we don't allow people to kind of be like, OK, so we were promised the sunny uplands, we're obviously not going to get that or anything better for our lives.
That's not the fault of 17.4 million Leave voters. And if you want to talk about disenfranchised members of the electorate, what about working class young people that did vote Leave in communities like that where I'm from? They do not have a voice in this debate. You are speaking for middle class university graduates.
And you're also a university graduate.
I'm not. No, I'm not.
And firstly, I think we need to remember that it's also people like women who have been completely shut out of this, people who live outside of London. We can't just leave this in the hands of members of parliament who are going to say one thing and then try and deliver something that they all know is actually going to make people a lot worse off.
Brexit's been delivered by a Remain Parliament, Remain civil servants and a Remain Prime Minister. It is not the fault of 17.4 million people that Brexit is not what people voted for.
And I've not actually said at all that it was the fault of those people, but you have to remember those members of parliament were elected the year after the referendum. They were elected by the same people. So whilst people can stand here and say that this is just a
on manifestos to deliver Brexit, both parties said they were committed to delivering
Brexit.
Their
constituents, and now they're looking at what's on offer.
The customs union. Now your campaign is turning around to people and saying you got it wrong, and those manifesto commitments should be ignored. That's damaging for democracy.
We've not said that people have got it wrong. We've said that people should be allowed, in particular young people, should be allowed the democratic chance to look at what's on offer and compare it to our current deal and make that decision.
So what would be on the ballot paper then? Because your campaign has not decided what it even wants out of a second referendum.
We have, for a start, the campaign that I run for our future state has been very clear. Firstly, we fundamentally believe, as do the majority of young people, that their futures are better served inside the European Union. The difference to last time is that the other side, the Brexiteers, have to actually define and then defend what they think should be on the ballot paper. Yeah, and the Brexiteers, people who are going to be on the other side, like Darren, should define what that deal is. They currently can't do that.
What do you think should be on the ballot paper?
I think it should be Remain, stay in the European Union versus whatever deal they can come up with. If that's Theresa May,
you just said the deal isn't Brexit, therefore you are giving people a false, you are painting a false narrative.
Chloe, what do you think should be on the ballot paper?
I think if there were to be a second referendum, which I wouldn't agree with, but we'd have we wouldn't just have a second referendum
Answer
or
the question,
the deal we
Chloe,
have.
if you would. What do you think should be on the ballot paper?
We would have second referendum, no deal, or the deal that we have.
You can't have a second referendum on a ballot paper. What should be on the ballot paper is an actual defined deal.
We knew what she meant.
Okay, people voted to leave, the biggest democratic exercise in Britain's electoral history. To turn around now and tell them that they got it wrong.
What should be on the ballot paper from your side of the argument?
There shouldn't be a second referendum.
No, but if there were to be...
If there were to be, we voted to leave. Therefore, the two options should be May's deal or no deal, which Britain would do very well out of.
So you would go for no deal,
Absolutely.
even though the own government economic reports have said that that would be a catastrophe and that loads of people
would
lose their jobs.
They also said there would be 800,000 job losses by now. It hasn't happened. We've actually had record employment.
I'm talking about now. You're the one who keeps referring back to 2016.
You're talking about the same forecast that I am.
Can you stop interrupting me? I'm talking about the current situation. What you've got is an impasse in Parliament and thousands of people who are concerned about their jobs and their families.
You can't decide what should be on the ballot, therefore your campaign...
I've been very clear what should be on the ballot paper.
Your campaign is as messy as they are in there. No, you're not.
She already told you what she should see.
Remain and May's deal, but despite saying May's deal isn't Brexit, therefore you are taking Brexit off of the ballot paper.
What you had in 2016 is cakeism. You had Brexiteers saying, oh, you're going to have this, we want that. They actually need to define what that means. How many extra jobs will it bring to people?
Okay, last word to Chloe.
You can't make exact economic predictions of exactly how many job losses there will be, and you can't predict exactly what the EU are going to do and what they're going to allow for us. So to say that we can't define everything isn't really a good argument. And when you talk about no deal being a catastrophe, no deal doesn't really exactly exist. If we say we're going to go with no deal, the EU, they're not going to want planes, for example, to suddenly stop flying on the 30th of March. They're going to make compromises with us because it's in their interest, and it won't be as bad as the forecasts actually say.
Final thought, Chloe, just before we go. If you were able to vote, which way would you have voted?
If I was able to vote, leave.
Thank you all very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Still to come on the programme for you, waiting to hear from the